Good evening. Great to be back in Bangalore and in BIC, and thank you all so much for your presence here. And what I want to do in 20 minutes is to take you on a helicopter ride of the field which is covered in the book. And I want to do this through stuff that is not in the book. So that's the value add. If you read the book, you may not find some of the stuff that I'm saying, but you'll understand the context. And my purpose here is to specify or explain to you the context. The invitation card designed ingeniously by Viju and his team here talks of Cornelius Vanderbilt, and one of our esteemed guests here said, "Is it the autobiography of Cornelius Vanderbilt?" And I said, I have not yet reached that stage of being of historicity. But the context, there's a reference to that, there are about 10-15 lines. And Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was called Commander Vanderbilt, established a massive empire, $100 million in the 1880s, by using steamships to do coastal trading. He was the Adani of America of those days. In this respect, I don't know what else he did. And when he was dying, before he died, he made a massive house, which I went and saw 2 years ago. And I said, how can a guy live in a house like this? I won't sleep. It has got artifacts, it's like a museum. But I suppose he made that kind of money, and in those days the land was not so expensive. And I said, what happened to the Vanderbilts? I have not seen them since then. I don't hear of Vanderbilts. And then, of course, I read the sad story written by his grandson, of how it all got whittled away. Now, that's not the only story of wealth getting whittled away. But what is interesting is what Cornelius Vanderbilt said about his making money, and what William Vanderbilt, his son, said of inheriting money. And in particular, this startup city where people seem to make billions in a few hours and lose billions in the next few hours, this message may be of some relevance. Cornelius Vanderbilt said, any fool can make a fortune. Any fool can make a fortune, but it takes brains to hold it. He almost flipped it the other way around. That making money is easier than holding money. And look what his son said 25 years later, William. He said, inherited wealth is a real handicap to happiness. In my case, it left me with nothing to hope for. This is the seesaw that confronts those of us who are chasing wealth. And it's a common thing that happens. You can mention many Indian families also. I start with this partly because it's on the invitation, but also partly because, what happened to Mr. Vanderbilt? Why did the money get... Now, there are a number of reasons, and it's not the intention here to say why do people make money and lose money. That is not the subject of the discussion. But one of the reasons was the Vanderbilt family failed to embrace the future. The sons carried on with steamship going around to various ports, and of course steam was getting phased out, oil was coming in, the nature of the engine and the motors, the nature of the ports were changing. Along with that, various other discrepancies or deviations in their own lifestyle contributed. They missed the future, and that's the reason why that particular reference appears in this book. And I found it to be a very, the idea of this book crystallized in my mind around then. Because I had been motivated through various other factors to look at why empires get formed and rise and fall. And one book by Paul Kennedy, which many of you might have read, The Rise and Fall of Empires. I'm not a student of history, so I'm an amateur. This point about the Mughal Empire, the Ming Dynasty, the Ottoman Empire, the Romans, and so on and so forth, you could apply to anybody else. And from that I crystallized why empires rise and fall. And I found something very common in business empires and as well as in dynasties. The rise is rapid, the fall is slow and painful. It's an asymmetrical parabola for those who are inclined geometrically. And the question for me was, why does that happen? Why does it rise so fast and why does it decay so slowly? All this period that we have seen in history, you've seen technology, you've seen wars, you've seen famine, societal changes. But the rise is swift because of the 5 vowels: A, E, I, O, U. A for ambition, E for energy, I for innovation, O for an outward lookingness, a mindset, and U is unrelenting. And this city with its youngsters demonstrates this very, very clearly in the startup world, where there is a display of raw ambition, energy, innovation, outward lookingness, and unrelenting. Then why does it peak and decline? The opposite happens. You become indolent, you become conservative, and you become above all inward looking. In a management jargon, you would say you become complacent. Now, all of us have worked in companies, or many of us, and we all have been citizens of nations. We know that this happens. One follows the other, sure enough, as night follows the day. So I said, why are we all so obsessed with the pace of change? Because you can't go to a CII meeting or any other forum and not be reminded that AI is coming, LLM is coming, and everything is going to change, jobs are going to go. And I started looking, I found a book by an Oxford historian called Ian Mortimer. And if anybody is interested, I would commend you to read these 2 books. It's called Centuries of Change. He did something very interesting. He took the 10 centuries between 1000 and 2000 AD. And he said, what were the major changes of technology and society that happened in each century? So there's our 10 chapters, one for each century. And then he wraps it up at the end by saying, in which century was the change highest? Which century do you think won the prize for the century of greatest change? Just take a shot at it. 1800? 18th century. And any others? Sorry? See, most of us would consider the current period to be the period of fastest change. The short answer is, it is not the century of fastest change. Some say 18th, some say 17th, some say 16th. And Ian Mortimer concludes his book by saying, it all depends on how you look at it. And this caused me to ask myself whether the tension due to the approaching change itself is causing us distress and worry, mental stress. You see all those health things that are also coming. Or is it our adaptiveness to the change? And then, in my own crude way, I don't pretend any great academic perfection in what I did. I plotted how technology has increased its pace. There's no doubt it's exponential. I plotted the tools to cope with that. That also came out to be exponential. So they are parallel. They are both going this way. And the gap is constant. So when we get worked up about the pace of change, we must always remember that it's the gap that we have to address. It's like a batsman who doesn't look for where the fielders are, but where the gaps are. And you can get obsessed with where the fielder is standing. But at least people like Ricky Ponting will tell you it's the gap that I look for and I use. In this regard, nature is a very good teacher. Because management books or books by economists or futurologists have a pattern in them. Nature is something that has been around. If human beings were not adaptive, we would not be sitting here. We would have been wiped out like the dinosaurs. So we are adaptive. We must understand that. You take some realities that we know for sure. The earth is revolving at 1,000 miles per hour. In Tamil we say it's like a bambaram, it's going around it. But none of us knows it. We think tomorrow will be like today. Which way this bambaram will topple, we don't know. But we don't think about it even. Nature tells you that competition is what drives adaptation. Absence of competition is bad because it doesn't drive adaptation. And you see this in nature, in all the African. My friend Alex Abraham has come back from the African wilds as part of his career. He went and saw this. And you can see that the gazelle that doesn't have to outrun the leopard, it has to just outrun the next gazelle, and its life is safe. So competition is a good thing. We've seen it in the public area in recent weeks as well. The third thing is, we think bigness and largeness is very important. That's why everybody wants to be a decacorn, a unicorn, a soonicorn. But actually, nature tells you that the most adaptive survive. The virus and the microbes have long outlived the dinosaur. So why do you chase size as a very important factor of power? Our own philosophy says keep your mind still, keep your body moving. But how do we lead our lives? Rather sedentary. We keep our body still and keep our mind moving by listening to election news and OTT and so on and so forth. So adaptation has to be continual. It cannot be episodic. It's like your human body. The cells that are in my body and your body today were not the cells that were, 50 years ago, 20 years ago. They are constantly renewing. Now, this is all motherhood and apple pie. This book is not about telling you something you don't know. It only reinforces what you know. It's like a book by Acharya Baba Ramdev on how to breathe better. You read it and you say, what's new about it? But you don't practice it. I mean, it's hell of a hassle, no? Getting up every morning and doing whatever Baba Ramdev tells you to do. And for the few weeks that you do it with discipline, you will tell all your neighbors, I am now doing yoga. I do 10 minutes of pranayam. But you ask the same guy after 6 months and he says, it's getting a bit under the skin, so I've stopped doing it. And that is the problem that we are addressing in this book. In this whole point about change, the key factor is to be able to observe the prodromals. I had to throw in one or two words which look complicated because then otherwise you'll give no value to the book. It's always nice to have one or two words like that. A prodromal is an advance warning, a signal. This comes from medicine. And what are the advanced signals that you're getting? And that's how a doctor diagnoses. Pramila is here and she will confirm that that's how doctors, they'll ask you all your symptoms and then put 2 and 2 together and arrive at 4 or 4.5 or whatever. We get prodromals all the time. But we don't know which is true and which is untrue, which is real and which is false. And we don't know, and it's too complicated to interpret it, so we leave it aside. But as you grow older, there's a transformation that happens to your intelligence, which those who got a little bit of grey hair will recognize, but those with only black hair will dismiss. And this is studies of psychology. When you're young, say till the age of 40, 45, 50, your intelligence is purely fluid. And if you can imagine sugar being put into milk or water and constantly being stirred, new experiences get put into the water of our brain and they're constantly stirred. And the brain gets richer and richer with sugar in that case and experiences in this case. But it's still fluid. As your old chemistry lesson from school will tell you, at some stage it gets supersaturated. And that's the age of 50. When suddenly the ability to absorb more sugar reduces, but the crystallization of the sugar begins. And that's how you get crystal intelligence. When you crossed a certain age, your past experiences crystallize into insights. So there's a place in this world for oldies. Since I don't find too many black hairs here, it's something comforting to share. And that becomes very important in formulation of strategy. Nowadays, everybody says you must get more women, you must get more people of other castes, you must get younger people. I think those are all good things from a social point of view. But you do need a few greybeards around the room because we need crystallized intelligence to be able to look at the future. Nobody can predict the future. And I emphasize these points because that's a role that we play naturally in our families and our society. All of us, whether our grandchildren listen to us or not, we try to advise them and they may dismiss you and saying, you oldies don't know. That happens in companies also. But in the field of enterprise, these are two different worlds and there is no bridge between them. You got people like Clayton Christensen, Michael Porter, Richard Rumelt, who write about the intellectual part of making strategy, which is very important. And you'll have people like Jerry Porras and Jim Collins writing about the behavioral part. But when we face a real situation in real life, both have to be done together. And so at the risk of making a pompous statement, which I will ask Rishi to defend, we think this is one of the very few books, if not the only book, which combines both. It brings left hand and right hand together. And Rishi was more inclined towards the intellectual part, and I was very inclined to the human part. And we said, instead of arguing, which is more important, why don't we just say that the world is becoming an and world? You need to be firm and empathetic. You need to be decisive and yet listening. So why can't we say you need both? And that's how this book came about. Although there are two parts to the book, we have taken joint responsibility and we've tried to make it seamless. And when you look at your career path, you realize those who got crystallized intelligence and those who don't agree with me don't yet have crystallized intelligence. So that's the sort of formula. You get hired in a company for your IQ. You advance in the company for your EQ. You have to get along with people and make teams. But you lead a company for your AQ. And those who are doing IQ and EQ work at the AQ level of their lives end up not being remembered for long. And AQ stands for adaptability quotient. Intelligence quotient we all know. Emotional quotient, Daniel Goleman has supersaturated our brains. But AQ, Rishi and I take a little credit for, to say that we are now seeding that into the discourse. How do you adapt? And what causes some people to adapt and some not to adapt? I mean, you find CEOs who are micromanaging their whole department. You find CEOs who want to know daily sales in some region. And these are not uncommon. I've had people come and ask me, my boss, my CEO of my family managed business, he runs the whole operation. I can't do anything without, etc., etc. And those are all the symptoms of it. When you want to embrace the future, sometimes it is under a pressure. Sometimes it's because you are accustomed yourself, you become AQ orientated and you do it yourself. And I want to close with a little story before I request Rishi to talk about his. How many of you have been into a jacuzzi? Any time in the last 10 years? Just raise your hands. Not too many. Well, you should. It's a lovely experience to go to a jacuzzi. And you see, how did the jacuzzi come into our lives? There were 7 Italian brothers. Mr. Andre Jacuzzi, Mr. whatever Jacuzzi. And around 1900, they migrated to the United States, to California. They were very good mechanics. So their brain, their fluid intelligence was saying, you people are very good with your hands and bending metal. So what did they do when they came to California? Imagine the early 1900s, the Wright brothers had just flown a plane. So they started making machining parts. Automotive industry was rising. They had their eyes on the future. Automotive industry was rising. Airplane industry was rising. And they became fantastic part makers. And Jacuzzi and Company was established in 1908. A very successful, what we would call MSME engineering company. One of the Jacuzzi brothers was very fond of racing and cars. He died somewhere in the 20s. And the family was distraught, very distraught. And the family said, we'll give up this business. It's a response anybody could have. They were influenced by the past. And then they were looking, what do you do? Because Italian families can be quite large. And then the child of one of the brothers got some disease, some affliction. Took him to the doctor, who said, come to me regularly and I'll put you into a tub and give you hydrotherapy. It was a big technology in those days. And the jacuzzi brother, that brother said, looking into the future, if my son has got this affliction, other people could get it. Can I not use my engineering knowledge to put some pumps together and blow air? And that is the origin of jacuzzis, which we all today go and pay 800 rupees, 1000 rupees, 2000 rupees to have a shot at. And I'm illustrating this to say how you can embrace the future. Lest I give the impression that this embracing the future is to do with corporates, I just want to close by saying it is in every aspect of our lives. Parents have to learn to embrace the future. They can't raise their children like their parents raised them. NGOs have to embrace the future because they can't just go around asking for money. And I think sitting in this audience we have Adirat, is he there? I can't see him. He's sitting in the corner there. So I've just read a fascinating book written by Adirat Sethi of something that's happening right here in Bangalore, which some of you might have heard of, but very few might have visited, called Agastya International. And in his very well-written book, which is too expensive to buy, so he gifted it to me, but he's doing something about getting it to be a less expensive book. All the points that Rishi has written in the book, first, they said we must have a core purpose. Many people ask me, is this purpose business exaggerated? The core purpose of Agastya International is to rekindle curiosity in children. As simple as that, Then they went through 5 steps, and those 5 steps, without reading our book, he's a Boston Consulting, London School of Economics product, so he's at least as smart as all of us. They set a very ambitious target. They've had a mindset change and influence other people to change their minds. And when Rishi talks about this, you'll see he will talk about companies, but it happens in the NGO sector as well. Then they studied what are the societal changes going on in and around that village where they got the land. What are the technological changes going around? And what are the business system changes that they had to embrace? And the work is now 25 years, they are still at it. So it takes a long time before you are able to embrace the future and see the result. Just like it's a long time, producing the child is the easiest part. Raising the child and making them contented and happy is a tough part. And the same thing applies to embracing the future. And in our book, we have talked about the behavioral side, which we have together authored, but I have written lastly, and the intellectual side or the analytical side. And lest you think that it's all about behavior, I would now request Rishi